Well, hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Discover New Music podcast from us at Pelt Music. Shortly, we'll be chatting with Real Terms, who we featured over on our Discover New Music playlist with their single Veil is Thinner. But before then, the usual reminders from myself. If you would, please do follow us on social media. We're on Facebook at Pelt and on Twitter and Instagram at Pelt Music. And finally, if you would, please do hit that like button, hit that subscribe button wherever you're watching or listening. Welcome, John from Real Terms, to the Discover New Music podcast. Absolute pleasure to have you on today. How are you doing?
Pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for having me. Yeah, doing well. Looking at my puffy, sallow face and wondering why I scheduled a morning Zoom call. There you go. Got coffee, so hopefully that'll improve.
Yeah, the coffee should help, definitely, and I've got one ready for myself as well. So yeah, it's absolute delight to have you on. So obviously, as is tradition with the Discover New Music podcast, we've obviously already featured you on our Discover New Music playlist over on Spotify. And the song that we featured was Veil is Thinner. And we're going to be talking about that in just a moment. But again, traditionally, this podcast always starts off with the same feature. It's designed, obviously, for people that perhaps aren't familiar with the band in question. So we always start off with what we call the origin story. What is the origin story for Real Terms? How did you arrive at this point in time?
I suppose, well, we've all been playing together in various projects for about 14 years now, I think. We met in all the usual ways, mutual friends and a few happy coincidences and all that stuff. I guess the Real Term story essentially starts with our previous band, Vasco da Gama, which finished in 2014. And then, well, we had a member leave basically, and then the question was whether we kind of carried on doing what we were doing, or whether we sort of scrapped everything and did something new, which is the way we chose to go. And yeah, it took us a while to find our feet with that. I'd moved away. We were based in Liverpool, and I moved to London for a little while for a bunch of reasons. One of them was a bit of disillusionment with music and how that had all been going and stuff. And then I did a few years in London, realized I was missing doing music. I went off and did something completely different, and then was sort of pining for music again a little bit. So then circumstances led me to come back to Liverpool, and then we sort of like went all in at that point on Real Terms, it felt like. So that was 2017. So that kind of feels like the proper start of Real Terms, really. Without Tangent that year, we put our first music out and stuff. So yeah, that feels like the start of the Real Terms journey proper, I'd say.
Yeah, it does that, but I love to hear that, the journey that musicians have been on to arrive at the point where they're at, and we get to hear so many fascinating and different stories, and there's some of them are the usual sort of story. Yeah, we were all friends in school, started playing music, or put an advert in a paper. Not that happens much these days, but social media maybe. But yeah, obviously, really interesting. Obviously, that sort of diversion away from music you took, and the move to London and everything. But I guess some might call it fate that you kind of found yourself back, with your bandmates.
I don't know. I mean, well, we never stopped playing together.
Yeah.
But I think I moved away with the intention of like, oh, I'll be back, every couple of weekends, and we'll write and stuff, and that just never pans out the way. Well, at least it didn't for us. It didn't pan out the way we thought it would. So yeah, it took me moving back basically to sort of feel like we were fully focused on it. And even like we're in our 30s and life gets in the way and stuff, so we have to work it around that. But
yeah, you said it just there. Yeah, life does get in the way quite often with these things. So it's fantastic that you've been able to obviously get to this point. Obviously, Real Terms on the cusp of a big kind of push with your debut album in the pipelines. But we'll move on obviously to the single that you put out ahead of obviously the album. So Veil is Thinner. Again, listeners, you can check it out on our Discover New Music playlist, or you can of course find it on all the streaming platforms, Bandcamp and everything like that as well. So what is the story of Veil is Thinner as a song? How did that song come together for you, and what's it all about?
So all of our songs start with us just kind of jamming, for want of a better word, really. With Veil is Thinner, I remember thinking that we were going in a really kind of going to a really kind of folky place, because Lenny, our guitarist, is a huge folky. He plays folk guitar and banjo, mandolin and stuff. So I think that's creeping in more and more. And I remember thinking that when we started with that kind of like the guitar part in the verse and stuff, I was like, this is great. This sounds like Big Thief, who's a band that we all really love. And then it's sort of, I think over time it just became this thing where obviously there's quite a lot of kind of synth stuff going on, which is down to our producer David Berger. And then like a sort of a big sort of rock bit at the end, which is one of the heaviest things we've done as Real Terms. So I think it probably encompasses a lot of the different things that we're trying to do as a band quite succinctly, I think. So musically that's where it comes from.
Yeah, and I guess that's one of the reasons you would have chose to put it out as a single ahead of the album, because it kind of showcases the different elements of what you're doing as well, I suppose.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah,
excellent. Obviously, again, we've really enjoyed it, and listeners need to check it out. Something else they can check out, which I always think these days really is just a lost art form, is the video for the song. And I was really chuffed when I thought, well, let's check out, see if there's a video for the track. And I was like, oh, well, they've actually made an effort. You can, there's an actual video here telling me a bit of a story. So, I mean, how did the concept for the video come about?
Well, to be honest, so the video stuff, like David, our drummer, is kind of the video guy in the band. That's sort of his department, really. And the first video from the album for Frantically Wrong was like David's idea, and he brought in a couple of friends of his who he's worked with on other video stuff, Craig and Chris, to shoot that video for Frantically Wrong. And then when it came to doing one for Veil, we went back to Craig and Chris, or David did, and they basically came, we said, we're thinking this, have you guys got any ideas? And they came back to us with this fully formed, incredible idea, which they just kind of went and did, and it felt really nice. It felt sort of proper, because we'd always just made the videos. It would be us playing in some form, like the first video is or whatever, and you try and make it interesting in that way. And it just felt very lucky that they kind of said, yeah, we've got this amazing idea, do you want it to be your video? We're like, yeah, of course. And I think it looks incredible, and I think they did an amazing job.
Yeah, they certainly did. It does look incredible. And again, listeners, you'll be able to follow the links in the bio of the episode of this podcast to find that video and have a watch for yourselves. I say it is a bit of a lost art form. Growing up in the sort of late 90s, early 2000s, of course, music TV was big back then. So I grew up watching music videos, but it's not really a thing now. Of course, you've got YouTube and everything. But social media as well takes over, and quite often people want almost shorter clips and stories and all that kind of stuff, rather than 3-4 minute video on a song. So I mean, social media is such a massive part of the music industry these days, which I think in some ways is very good, in other ways very, very bad. When you're putting out new music, obviously Veil is Thinner, and obviously you've got this great bit of art as the song, and obviously the separate art, the video, and how much attention do you put into social media? Are you one of the people that is sat there looking at the comments, reading the comments, or do you almost try to avoid looking at that? What's your approach?
Well, just to go back to what you said about the videos for a minute, I think you're right about that. And I think I remember kind of getting a group of mates together at my friend's house, the one friend who had MTV too.
Yeah.
And we'd just sit there for hours, and after a couple of hours you'd see the same videos again and again, but you got to know what the band members look like, and kind of what the images you'd have in your head when a certain song played or whatever, because that you would sort of surrounded by it a little more. Whereas now you have to seek it out. And I'm actually really bad at watching videos, even by my favorite bands. I'll listen on Spotify, whatever. And I don't really tend to seek videos out. But when I do, I'm always pleasantly surprised. You know, songs from records that I've loved like 3 or 4 years ago. I'll be on YouTube and a video for it will come up and I'm like, oh, I've never seen that video. And it's
Yeah.
great. Like you get to know a little more about the band and like their sort of visual identity and stuff. So yeah. So I think it's great to have that alongside like the music as well. Social media, yeah, like I'm sort of the reluctant social media person in the band, and it's purely out of necessity. I mean, I would love to be one of those bands who didn't sort of need to do it
Yeah.
if that exists anymore. I don't know if anyone could afford not to do that. And I think I've got a bit better at it. Yeah, my girlfriend works in digital marketing for a charity, and yeah, she's given me a bit of coaching about the right ways to go about it and stuff. So I think we're getting better at it. I think the thing is, like, I feel like when we have stuff to say, like when we've got
Yeah.
shows coming up or we've got a record coming out, like we have at the moment, it's kind of easier because you can say, this is happening, we're doing a thing, we're really proud of it, this is why we exist as a band, kind of thing. I think it's in those sort of, in the quieter periods,
Yeah.
it feels like there's an obligation to sort of constantly be putting out content. And that's what I don't, it's the spurious content that I don't like.
Yeah.
So that's what we try and avoid. I mean, in the past we've tried to do things that are sort of daft or funny and stuff, and I don't know. I think if that's done right, it can be good, but if it's done badly, it can be pretty
Yeah,
difficult.
if it's forced, I think people can tell, and
Yeah,
it's just not really going to hit home, is it? But yeah,
yeah,
social media is in some ways I say really positive for the industry and helps. In other ways, it just is dreadful. I've had to force myself through the full pelt music to engage with it a lot more. But yeah,
yeah.
it can be difficult.
It's just different, I think. Like, it's for me, it's not whether it's better or worse. It's just different. It's just
Yeah,
um, it's less of a music's less of a communal experience now. It's something like rather than watching Top of the Pops and you find out about music that way, or hearing, I used to listen to like Steve Lamacq and John Peel and stuff,
yeah,
as a teenager, and that's how I find out about stuff and read magazines. Whereas now I think it's much more of a kind of individual personal thing. So you'll get into something and you'll share it on Facebook or you'll tell someone about it, but it's a much slower process. There isn't that kind
yeah.
of like communal impact, I don't think, as much anymore.
Yeah, I agree, and I guess I'd link that back to like I was thinking when we talking about the music videos. I vaguely remember now Channel 4 used to premiere like new music videos. I vaguely remember Foo Fighters and Best of You staying up late at night because they were one of my
Yeah,
big favorite bands going up to watch the premiere of that video, and obviously you don't get
yeah.
that event anymore with it.
Yours is cooler than mine because the one that came to my head when you mentioned that was Robbie Williams' Rock DJ. Because there was a huge build up to that video because
Yeah,
it's like a horror movie and then it's obviously him
yeah.
dancing skeleton and stuff. But yeah, same. Yeah, I remember staying up and watching it. I was a huge Robbie fan in the 90s.
Yeah. I think a lot of us secretly were. To be fair,
Yeah,
it was kind of a
bangers,
guilty pleasure,
absolute
I
bangers.
guess. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly, definitely. So yeah, obviously we'll move away from social media, but not before obviously just pointing the listeners in the direction of where they can find you. So you're on Instagram and Facebook at Real Terms, and
yeah,
Twitter at Real Terms Band. So again, listeners, there'll be links probably in the bio of this episode, and you can
yeah,
click through. But obviously, you can have a search for the band there, and that's where you need to go. Obviously, these days to stay up to date with everything bands are doing, and of course, you've got a lot in the pipeline that listeners need to be keeping on top of. Obviously, we touched on the main one coming up is the album. So
yeah,
it's called Vantage, and it's out on February the 24th. First question really on Vantage is for again those checking out this podcast that maybe aren't overly familiar with Real Terms, what should they be expecting from the album? And I'm guessing, obviously, as you say, Veil is Thinner is a good indicator because of the eclectic sort of genres on there. But How would you describe Vantage for us?
Wow. I think the kind of music we try and make, in my eyes anyway, I'm not speaking for the other two guys, but I think the type of music I love is music that um has something in it that's like instant, that gives you something straight away, that makes you want to go back and listen to it. But then when you do go back and listen to it, you notice things that you didn't notice the first time.
Mm.
So that, I think, is musically what we're aiming for, I think. So like catchy and complex, I guess, basically. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, that's what we tried to do. And like the album itself kind of came out of lockdown in some ways, and I think bizarrely enough, we might not have got it done when we did in the way that we did without the pandemic,
Yeah.
because I think that made us so our first EP, Housework, which we put out invested interest in January 2020. So we had there was nothing big going on, but we had some shows planned and stuff. And as our first sort of physical release, that felt like it was going to be a big deal and kind of, kick us on a little bit. And then obviously the pandemic happened, and I think broadly speaking, we were all pretty lucky personally during that time. And then basically once lockdown eased for the first time, as soon as we could get back in the practice room, we did. And I think it just made us focus a bit more. We were like, okay, let's see what material we've got, because we're sort of, well, sometimes kind of, it takes us a long time to write and finish songs sometimes. And we'll sometimes have odds and ends of songs that are either abandoned or not formed or whatever. So it made us kind of assess all that stuff and look at what we had and what we needed. Look at what we wanted to do next, and what we had and what we needed to do to get there. So that's the album basically. So we started demoing just in our practice room, and then we recorded it with our friend Dave in his studio in Liverpool. And yeah, a few months down the line, we did some shows with Delta Sleep, and they mentioned to us that they had a new label that they were releasing on, and would we be interested in working with them? So we said, of course. And that's kind of where we are now, I guess, in a nutshell.
Yeah, it is really interesting to hear these stories at the moment, because I mean, obviously the pandemic was a horrible time for everyone. But I love to be able to, where I can, shine a bit of a light on some of the positives that happened. Because I mean, the music industry, as you say, was decimated. I mean, historians, when they look back, I mean, January 2020 is going to go down in history as one of the worst possible times you could have released some music.
Yeah.
But of course, opened opportunities that maybe weren't going to exist. I mean, a lot of larger touring bands that are part of a machine that is the industry, said, well, actually, we never had time just to take a step back and look at what we were doing and be able to, spend a bit more time in the studio. I mean, again, it sounds like there was a opportunity that was sort of thrust upon you, and obviously you've been able to sort of grab it with both hands, I guess.
Yeah, I think so. And yeah, I think I say we were lucky, and I think part of that is that we weren't we weren't really established as a live band at that point, so we weren't relying on gigs, certainly for any income, or really, like I say, we had to cancel a few shows, but that wasn't really, compared to the number of tours that were cancelled and stuff, again and again. I actually work in the touring industry as well. I work as a tour manager, so that meant that all my work disappeared, which was rubbish. But it just meant I had all this time.
Yeah.
And like, time is just really important if you want to get this stuff done. You can't. We tried working it around, full-time jobs and lives. You kind of can't really do it, and we all freelance now. which has its own challenges because there's still workarounds that need to happen. But yeah, I think we're in a good spot now, and it just sort of it made us reassess. It made me focus a little bit more and kind of I think recently I've been looking back at like how I used to do things in music and stuff, and I think I used to sort of think that if you just made good music, that you would eventually get where you had to be. And it felt like with our old band Vasco da Gama, that's kind of what was happening for a while. So I was like, oh great, this is true, this is how it works. And then for a few reasons we lost momentum, and then it all just went away. And even when Vasco became real terms, I think I sort of took for granted. I had an idea of how easy it would be having built up some momentum with the previous band. I thought that would be kind of a seamless transition, but you change the name, you go away for a couple of years, and that momentum's just not there anymore. And I think I was sort of underestimating the value of sort of treating it like work. Not in a negative sense, but sort of making it part of what you do and who you are. Which I think to a lot of people is just obvious, it's the way you do it. But I think that was a kind of realization for me. And actually the album title Vantage is kind of to do with that as well, about like perspective, what your perspective is on things and how that dictates how you go about things, basically. I think that's part of it.
Yeah, no, really interesting to hear that. Yeah, certainly. And obviously you touched on touring and live music, which leads me nicely on to the next sort of question I've got for you, which is based, you've got a tour coming up, which is always great, and obviously the industry's back open again for business now, though obviously there's different struggles now, obviously lingering effects from the pandemic, but of course cost of living crisis, Brexit doesn't help. It's obviously difficult for bands to get out, but you've got a tour coming up, and listeners again can follow you on social media and find the dates, find a local show. But you've got Nottingham, Bristol, Brighton, Manchester, and Liverpool over the next sort of couple of weeks coming up. So I mean, again, what is a real terms show like? What are you trying to put across with your live shows?
We've always been a live band primarily, and I think nowadays we're sort of doing more in the studio than we used to, so there's extra stuff in the sound which sort of may or may not be there in the live show. We have to pick and choose what kind of it's three of us, guitar, bass, and drums, and our drummer has a sample pad basically. So it's about what we can incorporate, what David can hit and trigger at the same time as playing the drums, and what sounds musical rather than like something that he's playing rather than just like triggering a track or whatever, which we're not that interested in doing, I don't think. But I think hopefully what we if there's anything lost in the arrangements, that's kind of made up for in the energy and the kind of, I think the communication that we have together, and our relationship as people, I think hopefully is what comes across. We're best friends and we love each other and we love playing together, and hopefully that's what comes across as well. Is kind of like the joy of that. I often think that on stage I'm spending too much time looking at those two and not enough time looking out front where I'm supposed to be looking. But maybe, I don't know, maybe that's fine. I don't know.
No, that's beautiful, and yeah, as a regular gig attendee, you can tell the bands that are perhaps phoning it in, or the ones that actually want to be up there. They're enjoying their time up there with their bandmates and with the audience, and obviously just makes it more of a communal kind of experience than just a show that you're watching, I think.
Yeah, it can vary though. I mean, certainly when I was a teenager, I was in a band where like energy was everything, and it was almost like it was more important to sort of look like you were rocking out the hardest above even like playing your parts correctly and stuff. Which like, I think energy is important, and it used to be the way if I ever saw a band who weren't doing that, I'd think, oh, these guys are fakers, you know what I mean? Like, what are they doing this for? And I think over the years I've learned that like that's fine. I think it's as long as it rings true, basically. I think the worst thing is when um bands kind of feel like they, probably like I was in the old days, bands feel like they have to
Mm.
be putting that energy out, and it's not necessarily genuine, and there's not conviction in what they're doing. I think that's always quite transparent and not good to watch, basically. So I think as long as, whatever you do on stage, if it rings true. I don't know if you know the band Preoccupations.
I haven't actually, no.
They're a great sort of like
Yeah.
post-punk band from Canada, but they don't the stage is like completely dark. I mean, it's really dark music anyway, and they don't say a word to the crowd. They don't really move around that much. The drummer's kind of crazy, but the other three
Mm.
are just like to them. But but the show doesn't suffer for it, I think, because they're putting out something that makes sense with the music they're making.
Yeah.
So yeah, so whether you're throwing yourself around or not, I don't think matters. I think it matters where, what you feel and how you feel on stage.
I couldn't agree with you more. Certainly, definitely. And again, listeners, great opportunity to be able to get out and check Real Terms out and see that for yourselves. Obviously, 5 shows coming up in the next sort of couple, or in the weeks following the release of the album, obviously on the 24th of February. So I'm assuming that's also a great opportunity for fans to be able to hear some of the new material live as well.
Yeah, it'll be mostly stuff from the album. Yeah, a couple of oldies, I guess we can call them now.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I think the sound has changed a bit. I think we're sort of letting loose a little bit more. At the start of Real Terms, there was definitely a conscious, I think, because our old band had been very much like kind of everything all the time, very kind of in your face sound, which we loved and still love. But we experimented a bit at the start of Real Terms with like holding back and sort of yeah, trying to put out like a sort of gentler energy, I suppose,
Mm.
with varying degrees of success. I would say, looking back. But yeah, the new stuff's definitely more like we're just leaning. We all grew up on rock music, and we're sort of just leaning back into that. I think it's like sort of sitting back in an armchair.
Yeah.
It's where we all feel most comfortable. Um, yeah, and it's fun.
Yeah, and that's always the most important thing, isn't it? To be able to have fun,
Yeah.
and that, for yourselves as the musicians and artists, and obviously the listeners as well at a show. So,
Mm.
sticking with the live theme, the sort of last big portion of the podcast that we have is called Set List Science, and we always follow the sort of live discussion with this portion. So I'm a massive setlist geek. Again, like, regularly attending gigs, I can see the artists that put a bit of effort into it rather than just going, yeah, we'll just play like the same setlist every night, and obviously not ever really change it up and anything like that. So how much importance do you put into the structure of a set list? And have you got any rules that you try to follow?
We actually had this conversation last night because we
Yeah.
were in rehearsal writing the set for these album shows, and I think yeah, we definitely want to mix it up because there are songs, certainly the new stuff that we haven't. I mean, there are songs from the album that have been in the set for a while, since before we recorded the album, and there's stuff obviously that we haven't really played that much live. Um, we don't really have a system. We definitely think about it, but it often comes down to guitar tunings. So Lindy will have 2 or 3 guitar tunings. So we'll say, "Oh, this will sound great after this," and he'll say, "Oh, it's a bit awkward for tuning." Like, he doesn't have a veto or anything, but he's just kind
Yeah.
of just aware there's going to be like a dead, that tuning break that everyone who goes to shows is familiar with, which again is something we've had to learn to sort of be comfortable with. I think like it's something you see a lot with younger bands, and we did it in the past where there's a bit of silence and you feel like you have to fill it with chatting, and I don't really think anybody wants that at a show. And yeah, I don't know, unless it's like their favorite artist or something, but nobody wants to hear us talk shit. So, but I think but we sort of fill the silence with loops or with just some noise, a bit of jamming or whatever, just anything but talking.
Yeah.
So yeah, we definitely think about it, and I think we haven't really played enough shows with this material, certainly like in a row, to be able to figure out exactly what works. And there are certain defaults, like, we'll default to playing either our sort of most popular or our biggest sounding song last in the set, because
Yeah.
then but from my work in touring as well, there's been a change in that, I think, because a lot of artists, and it makes sense, will kind of base their set to some degree on what their streaming numbers are. So
Yeah.
like, the song that has the most streaming will be the last song because that's the one most people want to hear, which I think always happened. But now you've got like cold hard figures to back it up and stuff.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, we'll just mix it. I think generally we choose like an opener and a closer, and then certain songs like to sit together.
Yeah.
Where it's like the same key or like the same tunings or whatever. So yeah, no, there's no set system, but we're going to try and mix it up
Well,
because we're not going to be able to play everything every night that we want to play.
no.
So
No.
then you have to sub stuff in, and then there's the chat about what you drop, and everyone's always got different ideas about that.
Of course. Yeah.
Picking songs for the song rather than the part that you like playing.
Yeah.
That's a common one. So yeah, we'll mix it up.
Yeah, and I love that. Obviously, you touched on obviously with all this new material coming in that you'll see how it kind of works out. And for me, there should always be an element of trial and error. Like what works where. Do you find yourselves, paying attention, especially when you're playing like the newer material, paying attention to the audience reaction to see how it goes down, and then maybe adapting it in the future to see if actually it would work better after this song or in this position on the set list? Or
I don't remember ever being conscious of that being based on the order of things. I don't think it probably is, I guess, but I think certainly notice some songs going down better than others. Sometimes the song that you think is an absolute slammer just doesn't really touch, and you kind of think, okay, maybe it's not as good as we thought, or the opposite sometimes. So yeah, audience reaction is important. Obviously, you only get that from playing shows. It feels a lot different. I think the other thing to remember is that like nobody ever hears your own songs the way you hear them, and no one's ever going to scrutinize them as much as we have in writing and arranging and recording them. So I think it's easy to put too much importance on it, easy to sort of project your own feelings about the song that you're like deep inside of and you've like slaved over for years. It's easy to project those feelings onto like audience members or whatever, or have preconceptions about what they're going to think of a certain song, like, oh, this song's too heavy for this audience, or whatever it might be. I mean, I don't think I've ever been to a gig, even by bands that I love, and thought, oh, they shouldn't have put that song next to that song. But maybe some people do. I don't know. No, that's great. But I think no one's ever. You're never gonna truly experience your music from outside of your music. So I think it's you can't second guess it too much.
Yeah, and that's a really actually insightful and useful sort of topic to end on, because in all of the podcasts we've had and asked these sort of questions, you're the first person that's kind of brought that point up, and it makes a lot of sense, really. Like you say, you've spent so much time and energy you've put into it and worked on it. Like the listeners, never ever going to have that. They'll have their own connections to the song, but they're never going to have that same connection that obviously you would have. And really fascinating. So love this portion of the podcast, because it always tickles me as a geek for set lists anyway. So really, really interesting. So obviously, listeners, there's a lot coming from Real Terms in the coming weeks. Obviously, you can check out Vantage on our playlists. You've got the album Vantage coming out on February the 24th, and of course, you've got that run of dates. It's been an absolute pleasure talking with you, John. What would be your final message for the listeners today? A lot of pressure. A lot of pressure on this.
A message. No, I don't have one. I've been struggling to talk about lyrics on this album because I haven't used it. I found myself writing about things that I never really thought I would write about, like politics and stuff. And I think the reason I'm uncomfortable talking about it is because I don't really feel like I'm qualified to, or like I don't think people are interested in what I have to say about these things. Um, so, so yeah,
Yeah.
no message. Just yeah,
No,
check out the
I mean,
music. It's good. I like it.
yeah. I mean, I would say, yeah, we're all qualified to talk about politics because we're all human beings living our lives and it affects us.
That's
But
it.
it is
Yeah,
one of
that's
them
it.
divisive like subjects, especially in music. It seems like whether you can touch on that kind of thing or not, and the effects it can have. But
But yeah, but that's my thing.
yeah,
That's that's my issue with sort
yeah,
of with yeah, feeling like I'm saying exactly what I want to say and it being interpreted in the right way and stuff. But that's, you've got no control of that. So.
exactly. That's modern life, unfortunately. So, I mean, my final message for listeners is definitely to check out the album when it comes out, stream it, or preferably buy it. And again, we'll have the links through to the band's socials and website and everything in the bio for this episode. So, if you've enjoyed listening to the track on the playlist, you've enjoyed listening to our chat today on the podcast, please do check out the album, head along to a show, and support a fantastic band, Real Terms. So I'm sure there's great things coming from in the future. So again, all I can say is thank you very much, John.
Thanks again for having me, man. It's been great.
Well, thank you everyone for listening. I really do hope you enjoyed that chat there with Real Terms. Make sure you check out their single Veil is Thinner over on our Spotify Discover New Music playlist. And of course, do follow the band on social media to stay up to date with everything coming from them. You can also follow Full Pelt on social media. We're on Facebook at Full Pelt and on Twitter and Instagram at Full Pelt Music. And finally, if you would, please hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, whatever you're watching or listening, because we'll be back very soon with another episode of the Discover New Music podcast.